One of the things I want you to think about when you're thinking about the 1950s is that it's really these two parallel ideas. And we talked about that in the 1920s discussions. But think about this, you've got this kind of fun 50s, right? Those happy days with the jukebox playing the rock and roll and the fun cars, and these kind of fun ideas, changes over time, the new television set, the new mall, new cars, all of that. But then at the same time, you've got this kind of retrenchment in society, this fear and anxiety and tension, much of it aggravated by the Cold War. And so, as we talked about the roles for women being kind of crunched down and limited, a lot of it's going to be in response to the Cold War. A lot of it's going to be this idea of getting everybody to behave in a certain way so the American image is clear and superior to communism, right? That the capitalist model is, and kind of controlling people. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of suspicion that's going to go on in this time period. And again, much of this is going to be connected to the Cold War. The very romantic idea of returning to a simple way of life is going to shape so much of this decade. Now, when you think of the Cold War in the late 1940s and the early 1950s, this idea of communism taking over much of Eastern Europe, there's some big things that happen in the late 1940s that kind of trigger the response to it all in the 1950s. So in 1949, this is a very big year, right? So in 1949, China falls to communism, right? So there was a lot of tension in China before World War II. They were having all sorts of trouble there. The war comes, China is devastated by the Japanese and spends from as early as 1933 fighting against the Japanese, pushing the Japanese back. And China is just in terrible trouble during the war. They're great allies of the United States. We partner with them, we help them, they help us. But when the war ends, China falls into civil war between Chiang Kai-shek, who was not communist, and Mao Zedong, who was communist. And in 1949, Mao's forces win. So China becomes communist. This is seen as a huge failure for the United States, for President Truman in particular. This idea of he let China fall. And now if you think of a map, China and the Soviet Union or Russia are right next to each other. And this idea of now you've got this huge amount of land in Asia and that is communist, that's terrifying for the Americans. The second thing that happens in 1949 is the Soviet Union gets their own atomic bomb. The Soviets get their own atomic bombs. So you know that you have the United States drops atomic weapons on Hiroshima, the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. We're the only nation that has atomic weapons until 1949. So it's this strange domination of the world in that way. This kind of threat that we've got it. Don't make us too mad. But as Americans, it's a great sense of security. We're the only ones that have it. Nobody's going to mess with us. Well, in 1949, not only does China go red on the map, but the Soviets get their bomb, and the United States makes kind of a strategic belief. The government has this belief that the Soviets and the Chinese are working together forever, right? That they're working together in cooperation against the Americans. So that friendship and partnership we had with China from the 1930s and 1940s is over. The United States supports Taiwan, which is where the national government of China flees to Taiwan. So we recognize Taiwan as the true China and kind of ignore that China exists. We don't give them any diplomatic recognition for decades. So this is really significant. And then in 1950, you have the beginning of the conflict in Korea. This idea that Korea had been split at the end of World War II. In the North, it becomes communist. The South is non-communist. And in June of 1950, the communists pass that border and try to unite Korea as a communist nation. The United States and the new United Nations say no way, no how. And now all of a sudden we're in a new conflict, the first real war of the Cold War. And it's important to realize that the Korean War is never an actual declared war. It's a police action that the United States partners with the United Nations in. So the last war the United States declared per the Constitution of the United States, the last war that we declared is World War II. We never declared war in Korea. We never declared war in Vietnam. We never declared war in Iraq. None of those things, none of those proper constitutional procedures are ever taken since World War II, which is a whole nother issue. But in the 1950s, these are huge geopolitical events, right? These are huge events that are going to make the American government very worried, very concerned, a real national paranoia that is aggravated by the fact that there is some real spying going on. You have a group in 1946 called the Ottawa Ring that had been supplying information to the Soviets. In 1950, Klaus Fuchs confessed he sold the American atomic secrets to the Soviets. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are convicted in 1951. They're executed in 1953. Alger Hiss is convicted as a spy in 1950. So there were real spies in the United States in the 1950s working for and supporting the Soviet Union. But it goes too far, right? It goes too far. So the United States had started what's called the House Un-American Activities Committee. So the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, and this is in the House of Representatives. And the idea is the committee forms first in the late 1930s, looking for fascists and communists to try to root them out because, what was going on in Europe and in the Soviet Union. By 1947, the HUAC starts kind of a new Red Scare. They begin with the film industry going in and looking for communists in the film industry, just based on rumors. You've maybe heard of the Hollywood 10, this idea of, are there communists in Hollywood that are trying to turn Americans communist? You've got this, it's a real conservative push to root out anyone who might be communist. It's not illegal to be communist in the United States, right? You can do whatever you want, you can think whatever you want, as long as you don't harm others, right? You can't yell fire in a crowded theater unless there's a fire, okay? But this idea of, if you want to be a communist, you can be a communist. But in this environment of the 1950s, it was just not possible. You just couldn't. Not that I'm advocating that or anything, but it's just you needed to be very patriotic and very American unless you wanted to be accused of being communist. President Truman responds to some of this, push by ordering an investigation and security checks of over 6 million government employees. Okay, we're gonna make sure that we don't have any government employees. State employees become subject to this as well. University of California employees had to take a loyalty oath. UCLA ends up firing 157 professors who refused to do so. You got to remember, these people are coming out of World War II. and we had just spent 400,000 lives fighting against fascism, right? The fascists are the bad guys. Totalitarian government is bad. People, fascists are the bad guys. And this idea of, having to declare a loyalty oath, many people believed was un-American, right? To have to declare loyalty is to force somebody on threat of their job to declare loyalty doesn't make sense. If they're loyal, they'll be loyal. Just because if they're a dishonest person, if you say, are you loyal? Well, sure, I'm loyal, right? It's not gonna mean anything. So it's into this environment that you have Senator Joseph McCarthy step in, and I'm sure you guys have heard of him. So McCarthy was a senator from the state of Wisconsin. He was in trouble, right? His reelection was coming up, and he was not doing well. He was an alcoholic. He took donations for votes. He faked documents so that he would look like a war hero. He was a gambler, had a serious gambling problem, which of course gets you indebted to people who can, blackmail you to do things. So he's in serious trouble. But by 1950, he comes up with this idea and realizes that he's going to get all this good publicity that he wants. And he becomes part of this anti-communism crusade, right? He doesn't care about it. He just wants to, get the publicity and save his career. So in February 1950, he gives a speech where he claims that right here on this piece of paper, I have the names of 250 known communists working for the State Department. Right? Now, he just made it up. He didn't have a list of 250 known communists. He was lying. There may have been communists in the State Department, but he didn't know. He just made it up. And so he spent the next 4 years leading the witch hunt, trying to get people, he didn't care. He was lying to save his career, right? This is the thing about McCarthy that we look at today, that who is this guy? He ruins people's lives. It was guilt by association. If McCarthy accused me of being communist, you would all be communists too, or suspected of it, because you were in my class. And the best way to free yourself from being accused of being communist and losing your job would be to think of things that I said that you could tattle on to prove that I was. I'm not communist, but that's that's how it worked, right? If the person you're sitting next to is accused of being communist, you must be communist too because you're sitting next to them. Oh, you're not? Well, why don't you come and testify against that person who's probably not communist either, right? It was just this vicious cycle. McCarthy finally goes too far in 1954 when he turns on the United States Army. He brings the generals in front of his committee and accuses them of being communist. And because it was televised, people are able to see what a bully he was and how awful he was. You've got to remember, these are the generals who just won World War II and defeated fascists and defeated these are the heroes. And so that was it. The Congress says enough is enough, starts to investigate McCarthy, discovers his frauds, discovers his problems, and then actually takes action on that. They don't just see that people are lying and cheating and stealing. They took action on it. He was officially censured by Congress in 1954, and he ends up dying of alcoholism in 1957. The lesson of this is that you've got unscrupulous people who will take advantage of the general fears of the time and stir the pot for their own benefit. And I think that's something that we really need to be aware of today. And this is a lesson of it. Lives were ruined permanently by Senator McCarthy, and for nothing other than his own career. So that dark side of the 1950s and Cold War communism definitely influences our memory of the time and shapes the decades to come.